I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to do what I did. But when the people closest to you twist love into a game, you start playing back. Even if it destroys everything. It started like most betrayals do, quietly. Subtle. A glance too long, a silence too deep, a bed too cold. My name's Alina. I've been married to Damon for 5 years. 5 years of what I thought was loyalty, commitment, and love. But looking back, maybe it was just habit dressed as love. I should have seen it sooner, the late nights, the distance, the way he looked at his phone more than he looked at me. The signs were everywhere, but I ignored them. We used to talk for hours. Now, his words were clipped. I'd tell him about my day, he'd grunt. I'd wear lingerie to bed, he'd turn over. I blamed work, stress, bills, anything but what it really was. I was lonely. Deeply, painfully lonely, even though I wasn't alone. And that kind of loneliness, it messes with your mind. Makes you crave attention, even the dangerous kind. Then his friends started coming around more. Jason and Malik. They were different. Jason had that charming devil energy, the kind of guy who smirks like he knows your secrets before you've told him a word. Malik? Quiet, intense, and always watching. The way his eyes lingered on me didn't feel accidental. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But women know. We always know. One night, Damon invited them over to watch the game. I wore something casual, but fitted. Something that hugged the right places. Something that made me feel visible again. And they noticed. Jason's eyes scanned me like I was on display. Malik barely said a word, but his stare said everything. I felt a spark. It scared me, and excited me. When I leaned over to grab a drink, Jason whispered low, just for me to hear. You shouldn't tease hungry men, Alina. I froze. He smiled, slow and sinful, then walked back to the couch like nothing happened. And Damon? He didn't even notice. I laughed it off. Pretended it didn't stir something inside me. But that night, I went to bed wide awake. My husband snored beside me, oblivious, while I lay there, burning. Over the next few weeks, they were around more often. And each time, the tension thickened. One night, Jason cornered me in the kitchen. His voice was low, almost tender. You ever wonder if he really sees you? He asked. I didn't answer. Because I did wonder. Every single day. Malik was more subtle, a brush of the hand, a glance that lingered too long. It was like they were circling me, waiting. And I hated how much I liked it. I started wearing lipstick again. Started checking my reflection before they came over. Started craving something dangerous. Then came that night. The night everything changed. It was raining. Damon had invited them over again. I should have said no. I should have made up an excuse. But I didn't. I wore a silk robe. Nothing under it. I told myself it was just to feel pretty. But we both know it was more than that. The moment they walked in, the air shifted. Jason's eyes darkened. Malik's jaw clenched. And Damon? He didn't even notice. Or maybe, he did. Because for the first time in months, he looked at me, really looked at me. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't love. It was something else. Possessiveness? Jealousy? Or, was it permission? That night, the living room would become a confession I could never take back. But before that, there was one moment. One choice. One glance, that set it all in motion. And once I crossed that line, there was no going back. Not for me. Not for them. Not even for my husband. They say the line between fantasy and reality is thin. But what they don't tell you is how good it feels to cross it, even when you know it'll destroy you. The rain outside blurred the windows, making the room feel isolated, like the world had vanished. The TV was on, but no one was really watching it. I sat on the edge of the couch. My silk robe clung to my skin like it had been waiting for someone else's hands. Jason was on one side of the couch. Malik was standing near the fireplace. Damon? He was nursing his drink, looking at me from the other end of the room. But this time, he was watching. And not like a husband. More like a man watching something unfold. Jason smirked. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, eyes locked on me. "You always look this good when your man's around?" he asked, voice dripping with challenge. I swallowed. Damon didn't flinch. Malik let out a quiet laugh. Maybe he likes to share. My breath caught. I expected Damon to explode. To yell. To throw them out. But instead, he leaned back and sipped his drink. Jason got up and walked toward me slowly. I should have stood. I should have stopped it. But I didn't. My heart was pounding. Not from fear, but from desire. Desire that had been building for months. Jason knelt in front of me, fingers brushing my knee. "You want this?" he whispered. I looked at Damon. He didn't stop it. And that was the moment it all unraveled. Jason's hand slid up my thigh. Malik moved closer. Damon watched. Silent. Still. My robe slipped open slightly. No one said a word. No one had to. The rules were gone. The room was electric. I should have felt ashamed. I should have run. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I felt powerful. Desired. Worshipped. Not ignored, seen. Jason's lips grazed my collarbone. Malik sat beside me and gently pushed my hair back. I glanced one more time at Damon. And I'll never forget his face. Blank, but burning. Like he was testing himself. Testing me. Then he nodded, once. Almost like permission. And everything after that was chaos. Beautiful. Sinful. Irreversible. They didn't rush. They took turns, deliberately, like it was some unspoken agreement. Like they had planned it all. And Damon? He watched. Not once did he leave the room. He just watched. Like I was no longer his wife. But something else. You never forget the moment shame creeps in after pleasure. It waits. Like smoke after a fire. And when it hits, it chokes you. When it was over, the room was dead quiet. No one spoke. Jason stood, fixing his shirt. Malik sat back, breathing heavy. Damon was still on the other side of the room, still watching. I pulled my robe tight, suddenly cold. Suddenly aware. I didn't feel powerful anymore. I felt exposed, used. Not because of what they did, but because of what I allowed. What I wanted. And Damon still hadn't said a word. I finally broke the silence. "Say something," I whispered. Damon looked up slowly. "I didn't stop you. That's not the same as being okay with it." He stood, walked over, and looked down at me. "You've been begging for attention. You just chose who you wanted it from." His voice wasn't angry. It was hollow. And that hurt more than if he'd screamed. Jason and Malik quietly excused themselves. No smirks now. No cocky lines. Just the heavy tension of what they'd been part of. Damon sat next to me. "Did you do it for me to see?" he asked. I didn't answer. Because if you did. I saw everything. I started crying. Not because I regretted it. But because I didn't know why I did it. To punish him? To feel wanted? To see if he still cared? He got up and walked toward the stairs. Before he left, he turned back. "Don't expect this to be over," he said. "You just started something you don't understand." After he left, I sat in the dark for what felt like hours. But then, my phone buzzed. It was a message. From Malik. "That wasn't about you." "Not really. Ask your husband what this was really about." My stomach dropped. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't the only one keeping secrets. I thought I was the one who betrayed my marriage. But I was just a piece on his board. My mistake wasn't what I did in the living room. It was thinking I had a choice at all. I stared at Malik's text for a long time. "That wasn't about you." "Not really. Ask your husband what this was really about." My hands shook as I read it again. My mind raced. I wanted to believe Malik was just trying to stir drama. But something in me knew, he wasn't lying. I went upstairs. Damon was in bed, facing the wall. I stood there in silence, watching the man I thought I knew. Then I asked, softly, "What did Malik mean?" He didn't answer right away. But when he did, my blood ran cold. "I owed them," he said, voice flat. "What?" He turned to face me. There was no guilt in his eyes. Only calculation. "I borrowed money from Malik. A lot. When things got tight after my job. I didn't want to tell you. Jason handled the deal. They gave me more time, more chances than I deserved." I backed away, shaking my head. "So, what? You offered me as payment?" His silence was my answer. "You watched them touch me, and you just sat there. Like it was a business transaction." Damon's eyes narrowed. "It wasn't about sex, Alina. It was about control. You want to know the truth? I knew you'd cave. You've been aching for attention for months. I knew if I opened the door, you'd walk right through it." He smirked. "You didn't betray me. You just proved me right." I screamed. I threw the lamp across the room. I wanted to claw his face, scream until my throat bled. But instead, I walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I looked in the mirror at a woman I didn't recognize anymore. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a lover. I was collateral. And the worst part? A piece of me wanted it that night. A piece of me had enjoyed it. That was the cruelest twist of all. I packed a bag the next morning. My hands were trembling, my vision blurry. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't scream. I just walked. I didn't know where I was going. But I knew I couldn't stay in that house, that prison, with that man. But just before I closed the door, Damon said, "They'll call you. Jason. Malik. They liked you." He smiled. "You're one of them now." I left that house with my heart in pieces and my body still echoing with the memory of that night. But here's the question I can't stop asking myself. Was I a victim, or a willing participant? And more importantly, if you were me, what would you have done? Let's be honest, this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about desire. Control. Power. And the things we do when no one's watching, or when they are. So now it's your turn to answer. Was I wrong for letting it happen? Was Damon worse for orchestrating it? Can a marriage survive something like this, or was it doomed from the start? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you stayed until the end, tell me, what would you do if your partner did what mine did?